Tēnā koutou katoa haere ke hui. Ki te mano whenua rangitāne, he mihi nui. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning all. Welcome to the Sustainability Committee meeting, 13th of March, 2024. We'll open with a karakia. Tu taua mai I runa, tu taua mai I raro, tu taua mai I roto, tu taua mai I waho. Kia tau e, te mori tū, te mori ora, ki te katoa, homi e, hui e, tae ki e. Good to see everyone here this morning and acknowledging some members online as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the business of the meeting, but good to see a number of guests and members of the public in the gallery. Administration support today is provided by Natalia and our advisory by Sarah Claridge, and would acknowledge David Murphy, the Chief Planning Officer, supporting here on the table as well. Thank you to the officers who are in attendance. The meeting is being recorded and also live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Health and safety requirements are now to a screen in front of you around fire and emergency. Please leave by the nearest exit if the alarm is sounded. Our administrators will be able to help with that, and the assembly area is at the clock tower Te Maraeohini and the square. Smoking is prohibited within any council building or entrance. There's a defibrillator at the foyer entrance on the ground floor, and if there are any accidents or near misses, please do advise the committee administrator so that we can get those logged and addressed. For online participants, please do keep your camera on and microphone muted unless you're addressing the meeting. And councilors are well aware of how the technology now works here. Please do advise any amendments or additional recommendations to committee administrators, either in writing or by email. And if for some reason I neglect to properly introduce you, please do say your name before speaking so that that's clearly recorded. So we'll move now to apologies. Note that there are a number would indicate that the mayor's apology is on council business. He's at the Global Cities New Zealand conference. We also have apologies from Councillor Fitzgerald, Hapata, Naylor for early departure, and Zabellan for late arrival. I'll look to move those and seek a seconder. Councillor Hancock. If there's no comment, we'll ask for a vote. Thank you. That's passed 8 votes for and none against. Just checking if there's any additional items. I've not been notified of any. Hearing none, we'll check in for any declarations of interest. Hearing none, we'll move to public comment. I've not been advised of any public comments, so I trust that means there is none, which means we can move now to the agenda itself, and first to consider the minutes of the Sustainability Committee meeting of 29th November 2023, Part 1 Public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm happy to move that by Councillor Hancock, and we'll open the floor if there's any points of clarification or correction. Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. And that's passed unanimously, which brings us on to the first of the reports, which is item 7 in your papers, page 11, and it is the annual sector lead report from Environment Network Manawatu. Fantastic to see you all here, and would invite Amy Viles, our Community Development Advisor, Rebecca Bell, the co-chairperson of E&M, and Mads Battichel, the coordinator, to join us at the table, and welcome and look forward to your presentation and comments. So just welcome. If you hit the right-hand button, you should get a microphone lit up, and we're in your hands when you're ready to go.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Amy Viles toku ingoa, kai tohu tohu tō Tāwhi Hapori Community Development Advisor. E&M are presenting their second annual report for their sector-led partnership agreement in year 2. We just really want to acknowledge E&M for the contribution that they are to Palmerston North and the wider Manawatu region, both as a sector lead but also as an advocate for the environment. We present the memorandum today, taken as read, and happy to take any questions.
You might need to tag the card onto it before you...
Take a card on. Kia ora koutou. Ko Mads toku ingoa. I'm the Environment Network Manawatu coordinator, and I'm really pleased to be here today. We're really honoured to have this sector-led partnership with the council, and I'm really excited to share with you what we've been doing for this year. You've received our written report, I believe, and so today I don't want to labour those points too much. I just wanted to show you some pretty pictures and talk about how we are undertaking our sector-led partnership. We've reworked our strategic framework this year, which has been a major piece of work, and we've got 3 main kind of roles that we've identified for our organisation. The first being sector leadership. As part of sector leadership, we talk about being having a strategic focus. So I'm going to just pass to Rebecca briefly, who's going to talk a little bit about our strategy work.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Rebecca Bell, co-chair of Environment Network Manawatu. This is the second time I've been sitting at this table in this role, and over the last year I've learned heaps and been inspired heaps by the work, by the mahi that is done in the wider Environment Network whānau. Before I just do what Mads told me to do, I just want to say that I'm sure that as you have read through the report, it's quite amazing, it's quite astounding really how much work is being done out there, and that's being coordinated by this little team of people down there on Cuba Street. And from a governance perspective, and I'm sure you can all relate, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of how much mahi goes on to achieve the goals and purposes of the organisation. And so I really just want to publicly acknowledge Mads and Helen and the rest of the staff, none of whom work full-time, yet work to achieve the incredible outcomes that you can see written about here in this report. So that's just, just wanted to say that. So in the last year we've been working to update our strategic framework. We've spent quite a bit of time thinking about our vision and our aspirations and our role and what that means. And part of that is thinking about how we can fulfill those roles within the community, but also manage all the increasing kind of requests and expectations of a group that is doing an amazing job, you know? So when you do an amazing job, people come and they want more and they've got these great ideas and they want to see them come to fruition. And the team is, there's just, the resourcing is just being stretched. And that's part of you know, thinking about the strategic, you know, direction and where we're going. So that's what we have been doing. We're working towards getting a strategic action plan completed by the end of this financial year so that we're ready to kick off in July, and hopefully that will help the organisation prioritise and think about how it's allocating its resources. So yeah, just from me, just really, really proud really to be part of this organisation, and thank you.
Oh, it's going. Thanks, Rebecca, and that might be the last time I give you a turn. Yeah, so, sorry, I'll just gather my thoughts. So you'll see up here, we've got a few photos of how we're undertaking sector leadership. We've got a picture of Siobhan, our Kai Resilience Kai Āwhina, at a stall, talking about community composting. We've got a couple of people presenting, is it Jeff Baker and Georgina Morrison, presenting to our Te Tiriti o Waitangi workshop for our membership. We've got Repair Cafe. We help our members to collaborate on undertaking the Repair Cafe. And we've got a picture of our wonderful team, part of our wonderful team up there. Those are all just really small examples of sector leadership that we undertake. Thank you. The second role that we have identified is that we are working on building capacity and capability for our membership and for our organisation. So again, you know, there's crossover between them. Undertaking Te Tiriti training for our membership is building capacity and capability. We have our Environmental Initiatives Fund where we've got individuals in the community able to plant trees, install gardens, create community opportunities for environmental action, and we celebrate volunteers. This year we were able to nominate Stuart Herricks for a civic award. We're really proud of the work that she's done, and really grateful for the work that she's done in building our organisation over the last many years, and so really grateful that she was honoured with a civic award for that work. And we're creating community. So we're looking at the environment, but we're also looking at how people, you know, interact with the environment, and how we that people are the important part of that. So he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. And our responsibility as people for the environment. So this kind of interconnectedness. And what's great about that is that people are connecting through these projects and programs, and through the work of our members as well. They're all about people getting together and getting to know each other and creating community. So obviously we've got some challenges that we've got lots of opportunities, and I think Rebecca alluded to that a little bit. We've got lots of people coming to us, and lots of organisations and individuals coming with lots of ideas. So one of our challenges is figuring out what we have capacity for and what we have to kind of pause on, and because we're kind of high achievers, we don't like to say no. So we're working on figuring out how we can say, you know, pause on that one, or let's put that into this basket. So that's a good challenge for us, and something that will make us stronger. It talks to our sustainability as an organisation as well. The challenges in the funding environment, you will well know, are present and getting stronger. There's not a lot of love for this type of work coming from our current government, potentially, or different priorities are coming through, and so we're really aware of that going forward. Wondering how we will continue some services, or finding alternative ways of funding those is a challenge. In particular, our Ruahine Kiwi work is coming to the end of a 3-year contract with DOC, and we're trying really hard to drum up some community support for that, to enable us to continue that so that we can return Kiwi to the ranges by 2026. We've got some good leads coming through and some really great support from a couple of businesses in town, and we're hoping that that will continue. But again, it's maintaining enough capacity to follow that stuff up, which is quite challenging for us. And the other part of the puzzle that we've are a little bit worried about for funding is the work that we do in food resilience. There's been really strong money coming from government in the past to build food resilience. The indications are that will be drying up pretty fast, and yeah, so that's a concern, figuring out how we can continue that. There's still a huge amount of need, still a huge amount of interest, so how we can continue that service. We're really grateful for all of the partnerships that we have had that support us to do our work so far, and I wanted to just briefly speak to some of the new opportunities that we've got going on as well. So Every Bite, we're developing a food waste prevention program in collaboration with Zero Waste Network and 3 other environment centres around the country. We've had one very small pilot of that project, and we're iterating that into the next phase. So by the end of the year, we will have helped to develop a nationwide food waste prevention program for households, which is pretty exciting work. The last point is around our TerraCycle boxes. We had a pilot through our Resource Recovery Fund. We stood up some TerraCycle boxes for recycling hard to recycle products, and that has gone gangbusters. We've got people coming in off the street constantly, probably 3 or 4 people a day drop off blister packs in particular, so many so that we have spent our fund and overspent it and spent some more buying those boxes, and to try and allow people to continue recycling them, because they really want to go out of their way to do the right thing. But we have decided, we've made the hard decision to actually pull back on that, because it's not making a huge impact on the major environmental problem of that. One little centre in Palmerston North, and the cost of those boxes, I think it's about $300 a box. So it's not cheap to recycle them. They go to they get shipped to Auckland, and then I think they get shipped offshore. They are recycled. All of the foil and plastic is pulled to pieces and separated and then recycled somewhere. But it's a really, it's not a solution to this major problem. So I just wanted to raise that, this kind of work was great because we learnt something, but what we want to do with that learning is kind of share that knowledge and go, well, there's this huge demand or huge desire from individual people in the city and probably around the country, to be fair, to do the right thing with their recycling, but they are handed an unrecyclable option. They need medication, and this is how it comes. So I believe the issue isn't at the consumer end, and I think it's beyond the scope of this council, but it's also something to be aware of, is how can we as people advocate for that change on a wider scale. So was there anything else on my notes? We're obviously looking forward to the long-term planning process that will keep us busy over April as we engage with our membership to try and make sure that we can give you as much good advice as possible, and to ensure that the public know what's going on and can bring their opinions to you, which I'm sure you'll be gratefully receive. And again, coming back to food resilience, we're really looking forward to hearing from what the officers are working on with the food policy work and the development of that. We're still really believing in there to be a need from this council to address food resilience as a whole city. So that's all I have for now. Kia ora. Is there any questions, I guess?
Thank you, Mads, and Rebecca and Amy as well, and a great summary of visually where some of your activities are and some of the things that are on your mind, so appreciate that. And yes, would open up to members for questions, and there are several apparent. First, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mads and Rebecca and Amy. Couple of questions. The first one is just around what benefits you see in continuing to be a sector lead. So you've got a little, like 3 lines in your report about it, but I wondered if you could expand on that and also maybe give us an idea of what I'm guessing will be the extra work that's come with that, and how you're managing that along your other day-to-day work.
Thanks, Councillor Johnson. The benefits first are that we get to speak to you directly is a really strong benefit for us. We get to, the sector lead voice or the environmental voice comes, to this forum and I believe is heard in a stronger way than it has ever been before. The other benefit is that we are asked more from council officers for our opinion prior to policies being made, activities on the ground. We are being pulled in to help collaborate on those or for our opinion on some of those. We were asked this year to give an opinion or provide some feedback on some signboards at Ahimati Reserve community about a story about a cat. And so we were able to provide some, put the council officers in touch with the Ahimati Reserve community again and just make sure that they were happy with what was being presented there, and we were able to shift some of the language of those boards to be a bit more environmentally friendly. So that was awesome. We're also involved quite strongly with the Featherston Street upgrade at the moment. We're helping to pull the community together for a pollinator pathway garden outside the berm of Mitre 10. So that's but to your point around time, is extra time that we haven't, when we haven't been asked those things before, we're able to just go off and do our own thing somewhat. While it does take more time, I think that it's really valuable work. Yeah. And it's work that we are, I guess the funding, the sector lead partnership funding is kind of what it's for. Does that make sense in some ways? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to check that the net result was still positive for you.
I do believe it's positive, yep.
Okay.
It is a bit more work, but I think it's valuable work.
Okay, thank you. So, there's an impressive number of projects going on here. What would you say are your top 3 priorities at the moment?
Well, at the moment we are trying to push the Ruahine Kiwi stuff across the line, in terms of getting a stronger, support network for that, and hoping to, in some ways hoping to enable that to fly, rather. I didn't even mean to make that pun. But with, not to kind of release it into into its own kind of thing. So it's a really powerful little project, or large project. But it takes a lot of our time at the moment. I'd like to see it take its own legs. And food resilience is right up there. And then the other priority that's simmering is how do we best continue to support the biodiversity projects in our membership. There's a lot of great work, there's always been a lot of great work and a lot of drive from biodiversity groups. And in the last few years, with our focus on Ruahine Kiwi, we've actually not been able to give them as much attention as we'd like. So that's another.
Cool. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Bowen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mads and Rebecca, for coming in today and sharing that really impressive presentation and the report, which covers a huge amount of work. And I think what I took from that is that a lot of it is focused here in the city. Your reach goes across our region, and Ruahine Kiwi is probably a great example of that, which for me then leads to questions about funding. So clearly, PNCC is your major funder. I see in your P&L you have Horizons funding. So I wanted to ask about the nature of the Horizons funding, whether that's sustainable, and whether there's any opportunity to extend the funding reach across other territorial authorities, maybe Manawatu District.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Bowen. It's a really good question, and the city has been our best supporter for the longest time. So, much acknowledgement to the city for seeing that potential for the environment work that we do. We are funded from Horizons, but it's largely project-related costs. So we have a climate change fund and a what's the other one we have with them? Oh, the freshwater fund. So we do some plastic pollution challenge work, and we also, Horizons helps fund the work that we do putting gardens into backyards and doing some of the compost stuff through climate change. We have approached Manawatu District Council, we continue to approach MDC, and we are not able to get any traction with them. They've given a small amount of funding, co-funding at one point for some of our plastics pollution work, and I think probably for our Ruahine Kiwi right at the start as well. But I don't know how to solve the MDC conversation yet. And in fact, we went to MDC last year and asked them to top up our Environmental Initiatives Fund so that we could support initiatives from the wider district, and they did not accept our proposal for that, unfortunately. We'll keep trying, because I think we get a lot of interest from just outside the city boundaries, and I think it's a shame that we can't help them. And we continue to try and build relationships with the other, Tararua District Council, Horowhenua District Council, but I think also their budgets are quite constrained. We have wider funding from Environment Hubs Aotearoa, which allows us to also increase our capacity and capability, and Lotteries Community funds us, and so some of those funds kind of allow us to do that work a little bit wider than straight in the city. And what I want to say about the city funding as well is because our own strategic focus isn't just for Palmerston North City, it is for the whole Manawatu River region, from Norsewood right down to Foxton and all of its tributaries. So we've got quite a wide reach for our membership, but what the city funding does is allows us to have that core amount of work, and we do focus most of our work here, but it allows us the ability to kind of stretch. So thank you for that.
Thank you for that, and those issues, and not just Environment Network Manawatu, and I'll probably speak to that later, but thank you for the work that you do.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks Rebecca and Mads for coming in. I've just got a quick question just really around sort of the Food Action Network work that you're doing. Can you just perhaps just give us a sort of a bit of a wider view of the issues that might exist around the coordination of, the various sector organisations that actually contribute to that? What are some of the gaps and what are some of the opportunities that we probably need to be looking forward to ensure that we get a much more resilient, I suppose, and a coordinated approach across the city?
Yeah, thank you. There is quite a bit of coordination happening in the 4412, as you'll be aware, through Ora Connect's work. But and Te Tihi help hold the kind of, would definitely hold that space around Ora Connect's main coordination. Our coordinator, Maury, for Manawatu Food Action Network, is kind of the lead space for the Kai Sovereignty Squad for the 4412. And we just had a meeting last week for that. There was probably 20 people around the table and all interconnecting on where we're at and what we've achieved as a group over the last 2 or 3 years that they've been meeting. I was able to kind of talk to them about that, and they were going, "Oh, we need to be more focused. We need to see some outcomes." And I was like, "You guys have had huge outcomes over the last couple of years. When they first were meeting, they were talking about standing up a container for some food on the Maxwell's Line site at Whakapaihaora, and they've done that and more. There's community gardens, there's gardens in backyards, there's projects. Two Pacifica community gardens are now standing up. And I think the breadth of their understanding of what food resilience is as a group has really changed. It's not just about giving food out, and there's definitely an understanding of that across the whole city, but there's not any real capacity from anyone to really lead the wider city direction. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And that's where I'm getting to. So what is, in your opinion, is needed to try and sort of resolve that issue?
I think it needs it needs some pretty dedicated coordination or facilitation of conversations, a bunch of hui, and then, the outworking space that comes from those hui, what are the ideas? How do we then enact those ideas? How do we keep pulling these ideas and threads together to create action that's going to make real change?
And so who do you think is ideally positioned to actually lead that?
It could, whoever has the resourcing to do that is the right person, but it could be Food Action Network. We've got a lot of contacts, we've got some real passion and understanding of how that works, and it could be, I'd say, a partnership with Te Tihi would be the best way to do that.
Okay. So is this likely to be a conversation that we might hear through the long-term plan submissions?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Thank you all. Just a couple of questions from me. I'm interested in the Every Bite food waste initiative, both from your perspective and from council's perspective, because it's an area that council's also moving in terms of intercepting some of the food waste. And I guess would be interested to know what E&M's vision is for these kind of projects informing council, and I'd be interested in a comment from council officers as well around how we're connecting with E&M when they're doing work that is potentially quite relevant to the space that we're working in.
Cool. So we've mentioned Every Bite to the council officers. It's quite a new program, and it has come from a national push with some unannounced MFE funding. It's kind of led almost. MFE has been working on food waste across the country and across a number of initiatives, and they've stood up some things at various different layers. So they've stood up some work around business food waste and commercial food waste. They're doing some work around at the household level, which is what we're working on, and they're doing that with our organisation, with Zero Waste Network, and they're also doing it through Parakuri. So Parakuri are also doing a food waste prevention program, and then they're doing some large comms kind of campaigns through Love Food, Hate Waste, and I'm pretty sure there's a hospitality sector kind of piece of work happening, and it's all happening at the same time and in some collaboration with each other. So it's largely been led from MFE, and it is in a brand new phase. The Every Bite program is a 3-year program. We're part of it we'll be part of it for sure for the first year. So we're part of the development team, and then we'll be required to find our own funding for that going forward if if we want to keep doing it. So that's another challenge, because the next lot of funding will be going to training other hubs to do that over the next 2 years. I don't think it's at the stage of informing anything yet, but I think that it will. I think that it will allow us, by the time we've iterated the program, I think it'll be a really effective program for individuals to engage with. It's a behaviour change program, so it's around people being able to, like reduce the amount of food that they are bringing into the house to eat, but then not actually eating. So, and it's relatively simple, but I think it's going to have good impact. It will definitely be worth keeping on conversations with the officers about that. The other program that we've been doing around food waste is the composting initiative, which is a community composting trial, and that has been funded through the Resource Recovery Fund, and we had a contract from Jonathan Hannon, who received that fund to do the community part of that work. And so that information has gone directly back to officers as part of our accountability for that program. Did that
Great.
answer?
Thank you.
I'd like to see for the food waste composting, I'd like to see like a mixture of, like community composting initiatives stood up, as well as, the curbside. That's what I think. I think the real power of community is missing in a curbside collection program.
Great, thank you. If I could get a comment from officers, I'd be interested just kind of how it's working on the staff side in terms of interfacing with some of these initiatives that have potential complementarity with our own work in these kind of areas. Don't know who wants to pick that up. Yep.
I'm going to be honest, I was actually emailing when the first question came up. So can I just have a quick can I just have a quick reminder of the query?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Natasha, for coming to the table. I'm just interested when, at the community level, we're having initiatives that are addressing things like resource recovery and waste, kind of how we're operating from the council side in terms of awareness of what's happening there and kind of actively taking on board any useful insights or learnings.
Oh, great, yes. So as part of the investigation that we'll be doing next year to roll out the food scraps, the detailed investigation for rolling out a food scrap service, we'll be taking on board the feedback from the work that Mads and Jonathan did from the money from the Resource Recovery Fund. We'll also be looking at guidance from the MFE about some of the performance targets that they're set and how we can incorporate that information to meet those curbside standards. So I definitely agree that food scraps and food resilience and food diversion, they're all very much interrelated in a very interesting way, and I think we need to make sure that we're working together and that a lot of programs are going on, like from the MFE, as Mads indicated. There's the Love Food, Hate Waste, there's the CHI 4412 project. There's a lot going on, and I think that part of the work that we'll be doing with my team next year is making sure that there is some integrations and collaboration. Have I hopefully answered your question?
Thank you for that response.
Pardon, sorry?
Thank you for that response. Looks like Mads might have a further contribution.
Love this technology, it's fantastic. I just was mentioning to Natasha that we have also been in quite close communication with Natasha and her team about the TerraCycle boxes. They obviously funded that through the Resource Recovery Fund as well, and kind of the challenges there, but also the huge uptake and so I've been able to have some quite frank conversations about how that is in the city and about that community desire to do recycling and how they can tap into that further. Yep.
Cool, thank you, and thanks, Natasha, appreciate that. Councillor Arnott, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, ladies. I was wondering if you'd ever been in contact with the Regional Council about the amount of rubbish in the Mongoni stream. I recently walked from Pioneer Highway to where it enters the Manawatu and was pretty shocked, to be honest, at how much was there. Could do with a boom across at that mouth and stop everything being caught. Has that ever been drawn to your attention?
Yeah, so that's our Plastics Pollution Challenge project has been going into those streams, Mangoni Stream, Te Kawo Stream, and Pioneer Drain for 3 or 4, maybe longer years, every year, going in and collecting rubbish and sometimes measuring what that rubbish is. And that has actually been funded by Horizons Freshwater Fund, what's now the Freshwater Fund. So they are aware of that rubbish. If the rubbish gets too much for us, we have sometimes go to clean up a site. It's either too dangerous, there's too much, and we have the council about getting in there and doing it. So yeah, they're aware, and I think there's that constant kind of back and forth around what is the best thing to do about that.
Thank you. It'd also be interesting to maybe put a boom across at the start of the city boundary and see how much rubbish comes from the other council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question and perhaps comment at the end. I do appreciate the line of questioning. Just a final question for me, if I might. Just interested to know how the space in Cuba Street's kind of working out at this stage of the organization's journey and kind of aspirations around the future.
Thanks, Brent. The space is still way better than we've had ever before, but it is starting to stretch at the seams somewhat with the number of people coming into the centre, which is what it's all about. Undertaking, recycling opportunities. While we're going to stop the blister packs, we're going to start some stuff about milk bottle lids and wine caps. So there will still continue to be people popping in kind of in all sorts of random times. It functions as our meeting room and our showroom at the same time, so it can be quite disruptive. We have quite a lot of stuff that we've accumulated for our projects, and so storage is also an issue, although we've found a solution down the road and around the corner for that at this point. So I think it's been great. It could be better, is the short answer. The aspirations are it could be better.
Great. Well, thank you all for the presentation, and you're welcome to take a seat back in the gallery at this stage. Thank you. So we have a recommendation in front of us that the committee receives the annual sector lead report, Environment Network Manawatu, January to December 2023, attachments 1, 2, and 3, which I'll look to move, seconded by Councillor Hancock, and open it up for any comments. And Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to start by saying what an impressive report this is. It really is. And very many thanks to E&M and all of the member groups that contribute to making this environmental work so successful. And I've just been reflecting on the growth really of E&M, which has been exponential, I would say. And I am getting the sense that there's a number of pressures in the pipeline ahead in terms of funding, but also in terms of being able to sustain some of the many projects that are going forward. So that, I think, is correctly identified as a challenge for the next 12 to 18 months. The other thing I just wanted to comment on is the Manawatu Food Action Network. And I mean, some of these figures are just astounding. Like in 1 year, the number of Manawatu Food Action Network members went from 45 to 352. And I mean, that's just a phenomenal amount of growth. It demonstrates the need in the community. And I think it's almost getting to the point where this Food Action Network, is going to need either additional resourcing or additional assistance, and I think Councillor Hancock was sort of hinting at it in his questions. There's also an unmet need across other sections of the city around this. So I guess I'm identifying some challenges ahead, and maybe some ways in which we, as in council and E&M together, need to be thinking about how we can continue the progress, but also make sure that E&M just doesn't become stretched so many ways that it kind of is under too much pressure to be effective. So I think massive congratulations in order. I'm very, very impressed with the report. I think it seems the more work you do, the more need is uncovered, which is good, but also challenging. So we'll bear this in mind for planning and resourcing going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins, Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, o te rā tēnā tātou. Very much in line with Councillor Johnson, I too want to extend my congratulations to E&M. The hard-working, committed staff, volunteers in the groups, they do an amazing job and service to our city and beyond. There was mention, I think, that Matt said, oh, we're high achievers. Well, I'd actually dispute that. I think you're overachievers. Clearly, the funding challenges are something that is really going to be the thing to hold them up from soaring even higher and achieving what they need to. And that's likewise something that we would look at or consider very carefully, because I don't think anyone sitting around here would dispute the importance of your work. I applaud you for being an active and supportive Te Tiriti partner. Ngā mihi kia koutou. And of course, when I look at page 19, you talk about the whanaungatanga between E&M and local iwi and hapu, particularly when we consider the Norsewood to Foxton stretch. There are several iwi in there, and that's fantastic that you have that communication, that that relationship, you know, so that will continue to be pivotal, especially moving forward. I'm grateful to the businesses who donate materials, as mentioned on page 25. Big mihi to them, and I hope we get more businesses, hopefully, or individuals wanting to donate their materials. I think that the Palmerston North Repair Cafe, and indeed all the projects that you have, are interrelated and educative. So that brings, the educative component brings something special and extra to our city, to our wider communities, and helps with the social aspect, development and support of our people as well, young and old, and also helps achieve the objectives of their strategy, of our strategies. In Māori we have a saying, mā wai hei te aki a papa tuanuku, the little ones at Kohanga know this, who will look after Mother Earth, and you've clearly responded, as we know, mā tātou, all of us. Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and completely agree with the very eloquent words from our Deputy Mayor on the success of Environment Network Manawatu. I wanted to comment on a couple of issues particularly. First, anecdotally, I was speaking to somebody who's recently moved back to Palmerston North, and they'd been able to secure accommodation, but were pulling their hair out about the state of the overgrown garden they'd inherited. And I was able to connect them through the Food Action Network, and they had some lovely people come round and help install gardens, which I think to anybody else might have seemed like a small thing. I don't think it's a small thing at all. And it wasn't a small thing to that individual and to that family, who felt not only that Palmerston North was a place where they were supported, but that we cared about the bigger issues, and that was made evident in our caring about the small issues. And you did that for us, and it was I was very grateful in that moment, as was that family. I think that's a great project. You're putting power back with people to be able to sustain themselves and their families, and it's incredibly important to people's manner. And I think, yeah, that brought that home for me in a way that maybe a report on a page doesn't always do it. So thank you. And then I think the bigger issue for me, and I think this is one, colleagues, that we will start to see as the sector lead organisations come to present, not just to this committee, but to community and then to culture and sport, is about the leadership role that our sector lead organisations have enthusiastically stepped into. I think across the board we're seeing growth and development. We're activating our community. They're taking control of their own destiny, using council funds to do that. But what we're seeing is what we've always known, that Palmerston North has a leadership role for our wider region. And the good work that's happening in the city supports and also needs a symbiotic relationship with the work that's happening across the region, sometimes in this case by our regional council, but with other territorial authorities as well. But I hear consistently, and I'm sure you do, that the funding sits with Palmerston North City Council and not necessarily with our territorial authority colleagues. Or if there is funding, it's on a project basis or on a year-by-year basis, which doesn't support the sustainability of these sector lead organisations. And so I'm signalling that now. I hope that our sector lead organisations are all submitting to LTPs all over the place, but we all know what a huge amount of work that is. And I think there is a place for us as Palmerston North City Council in our own submissions to other TA LTPs or advanced annual plans or whatever they're doing this year, to speak to the leadership role that our sector lead organisations are taking and the undoubted value that that's delivering across our region, and to seek some kind of support to those projects from our colleagues. I think that would be fair and would only serve to increase the value that these organisations are demonstrably offering across the region. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, colleagues, for those comments. Very much concur, and feel you've traversed the territory quite well and probably made my comment a little bit easier to give. But I do want to just follow up with a very sincere thanks from the committee, from council, and from the wider community to E&M. You guys are in an amazing position in the community that is largely down to the incredibly hard work that the committee, the staff, the volunteers are all putting in. And you're very much the unsung heroes of what's happening at the community level in the environment. So I'll leave you unsung in that I won't try to sing you a song, but I do want to very much make that clear that there is appreciation there. Particularly pleased to see in this report, that there are new initiatives coming in, that you're being approached by MFE to say, hey, can we do something in your community? Because, the reason that MFE is coming here isn't because they rolled the dice. It's because they've seen an organization that knows how to engage with the community, how to get things up and running quickly, and how to deliver some value, that has a really strong culture around making things happen well, around good accountability back to funders, et cetera. So just want to acknowledge really the incredible work there. And as well that you are facing some challenges. I think Councillor Johnson's comments in particular were relevant there. And if there are things that council can do to support on that journey in terms of engaging with potential sources of funding or resourcing for key projects, please do approach council in that regard. These are incredibly important projects for the health of the environment, both within the city as well as beyond in the district, and very keen to see that those incredible investments that have been made, particularly around Rohini Kiwi over a number of years, do not become stranded assets, but they're actively used assets in the future that actually deliver those biodiversity outcomes that we are hoping for. So best wishes for the year ahead. We will see you, no doubt, before the year is up. But thank you again for the report, and thank you to staff for your assessment and for bringing the overview to us as well. So with no further comments, we will take a vote. Thank you. And that's passed unanimously, 9 votes to. That brings us to the item 800, which is the wastewater treatment plant Nature Calls quarterly update, and my pleasure to welcome Mike Monahan, the group manager for Three Waters, to the table, and Anna Lewis, welcome as well, project manager for the wastewater discharge consent program. I'll give you a moment to settle in, and then we'll be in your hands to introduce the report which we've had on our papers.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Mike Monahan aho. Thank you, Mr Chair and Councillors, for the opportunity to present this report today. We'll take the paper largely as read. However, there's a slight update to 6.2 under the budget heading. When we wrote the report, we only had the end of January figures. We now have an updated end of February figures. So if you would like to note that to date, $1,088,986 have been spent against a project year-to-date budget of $913,000. So we're ahead of budget at this stage. With a total year budget of $3 million, we're confident that we're on track. So with that, we'd like to open up for questions if there are any.
Great, thank you. Looks like there are a couple. Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, thank you. And I note that the report does mention this year's budget. My questions really relate to the bigger budget that's identified in the long-term plan, the 650 million. Is there any breakdown of that budget that is available at present?
So the 647 million is the inflated figure of the 550 million. We can provide a very high level breakdown of what the project sort of milestones would be. You'd appreciate, councillors, that at this stage we don't have detailed design, we don't have a consent issued yet, so it would all be very much high level, but yeah, we can provide that information.
Okay, thank you. Just in particular, it would be good to understand what the level of investment is in the acquisition of the land and the pipes to get to the land. And I'm just interested to understand whether there's any part of this work at the moment that's looking to, what sort of consideration's been given to looking at whether there are ways to minimise the overall cost of the project.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's some active work that the project team are currently on with. It's too early to use terms like value engineering because we don't have a design to value engineer against, but we're certainly looking at alternative processes. This is kind of priced at a very high level on traditional wastewater treatment processes. So we're going to do some work around, are there any new initiative, worldwide initiatives around wastewater treatment? So certainly we'll be doing a little bit of a scope challenge at some point just to see if we can, and we're confident that we can sort of, come back with some alternative options.
Okay, thank you. And just final question on that. I went back noting that the original recommendation when the option was endorsed at council did include a cap on the amount of land, but it was recognised that it was hopeful that that much land might not be required. The notes of the minutes do still refer to quite a large amount of land. Is there any thinking at this stage about how much land may actually be required?
I think we're still in a position where the total amount of land that was initially suggested will still be required, but we're also doing a lot of work around refining that. We now understand that we have to have buffer zones and we have to have exclusion zones. So if we buy a piece of land, it may not be that we can use 100% of that land for the land-based distribution. So yeah, we're doing some work in that space as well to get that full understanding.
Great, thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thanks both. My questions are about the Horizons requesting further information. So my read of that was we got 200 questions back. That wasn't entirely unexpected, and the clock stops while that work continues. The question that triggered for me was, is that work capable of being done within the time frame we'd imagined for the project, or are we running any risks against timelines?
No, we're pretty confident that the project plan that we've got will deliver by the 26th of June, which is the commitment we've made to Horizons. There are one or two of those questions which sit outside of the control of council of the project that rely on third party. So if we had a risk, we've identified that they're the risk, but we're working closely with those partners to make sure that we do deliver on time.
So what happens if, for whatever reason, we can't answer the questions within the timeline we've identified with Horizons?
Yeah, we've got a very close relationship with the team at Horizons, and we would flag that early and have that conversation.
But if that happens and they're fine with it, we continue to take our time, does that put the extended project timeline at any risk there?
Thank you, kia ora tātou. In the event that we cannot or do not answer those, what will happen is we'll have a conversation with Horizons about that, at which point, if that was the case, we would advise them of that. They note that, and then they'll make a decision about whether or not to move to the next part of the RMA process.
Right.
So in this situation, potential notification.
And possibly outside the scope of the report. So, Mr. Chair, you can... I'll ask and we'll see where we go. Just with the changing legislative framework that we're in and the new the new process that allows people to skip out of RMA and go for their own consent, is that something that might be of interest to us, or are we happy with where we're at?
Are you referring to the fast track
That's the thing.
process? I mean, that's just been released in the last week. It's an interesting question, something that we haven't considered. I haven't had a chance to look at it properly, and we haven't had a chance to consider it as a project team. When that information came out earlier this week, it's a bit of a blur, but yes, very, very hot off the press.
Yeah.
My understanding is they haven't issued or named projects as part of that, which is what we were originally expecting would happen. So yes, that is something that we could talk about with the legal team. I couldn't answer the question as to whether or not we are applicable for that.
A decision to pursue that, would that be an operational decision, or would that be a decision that would come through a chamber if we're looking to switch horses midstream? Too soon to say?
Looks like the chief executive is going to take that one.
Budget.
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, we'll take that to the LTP perhaps. Just in relation to your comment, look, the change in legislation and considerations of the fast track process does mean that you're able to leapfrog some steps. I'd suggest that this particular project is probably one where we may not want to do that. So we do need to kind of carefully consider that. I would consider that we might consider going down a different process if at some point in time we needed to change the way that we were going through the consent process we were going through at this point of time, if that makes sense. For instance, if from technical point of view or disposal to land might become problematic, and we had to change course, that means that we would need to be looking at lodging a new consent, for instance. But there's no talk or consideration of that at this point in time.
But if we were going to do that, would that be a decision for the governance?
Yes, it would be.
Excellent. That's my question. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and to the Chief Executive. We'll now move online to a question from Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora kora. Excuse my voice. I just had a question relating to the Section 92 questions as well, particularly the draft land management plan and the groundwater seepage monitoring plan, which were technical bits of work being finalised. And I'm just wondering how that marries up with our envelope of effects approach for an area of interest, which seems to be sort of a general versus specific technical question, and how we're endeavouring to answer that in a satisfactory way for Horizons?
Yes, good question. The management plans are very high level, and those management plans that have been drafted would be sent through to Horizons, as I understand it, for future certification. So it just outlines the process, which is fairly standard for an application like this.
Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you, Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mike and Anna. Just a couple of questions. Just in terms of the steering group met on the 27th of February, and I assume that what actually took place at that meeting is not included in this report. So I was just wondering if there's anything there that this committee might benefit from an update from that meeting.
Thank you, Councillor. The steering group did meet in February, and the main matter of business was to finalise the terms of reference for the group, and there's a paper that I've just completed and will be brought to Council, so Council can consider adopting those finalised terms of reference. There was a tour of the current wastewater treatment facilities for all members who were perhaps new or unfamiliar with wastewater treatment, and then an update given, very similar to this update you're receiving today, on where the project is up to at present. And that was the main order of business for that meeting.
Great, thank you, Mike. And just the other question I've got really is the flow mixing study and the stream testing study. That's been completed, I assume, from the paper, but the process is that's the results of that are going to be reported to iwi. So from there, when can we expect to this committee to hear the results of that?
Yes, so the councillors will recall that last summer it was impossible to do this work, and this is work that we was hoping to have done much earlier than this, but the river conditions didn't allow that. Fortunately, we've had a relatively good summer this year, and we was able to get on and do all that work. The report is currently being finalised by the consultant who did the work. As soon as we have that report, we will share it with the relevant parties, including yourselves, iwi, and the steering group members, and that will also go to Horizons to answer some of the questions in the Section 92 as well.
So we would expect to hear the results of that at the next Sustainability Committee meeting? Is it all before that?
We can, I mean, if there's a desire, we can provide a copy of that report before then.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Couple questions from me, just around the 200 questions that are going back to Horizons. Is there any opportunity for us to socialise answers before, or is it simply like a hard deadline and you just hand your homework in and get judged against it?
Certainly the technical team are reviewing all the questions that are answered by our consultants, so Stantec, PDP. They're providing us with their responses, and we're reviewing those responses, and then the plan is to send all the responses together before the deadline.
Thanks. That sounds like an internal review process within our part of the equation. I'm wondering, is there anything that can potentially get tested with Horizons to understand if we're kind of in the ballpark or not, or do we potentially face, even having gone through an internal review, that things just get turned back?
So Anna can probably answer this better than me, but my understanding is that once we supply the response to their questions, they will review those themselves, and if there's further questions to come from those, that's the next iterative process. Have I got that right?
Yes, so in some situations the questions that they've answered weren't clear, so we've gone back to clarify that with them already, and in some situations the specialists have spoken to the equivalent on the Horizon side so that we can make sure we're answering what they're exactly, or understand what they're asking. As Mike said, they may come back and ask additional questions, and one of the things that we are doing at the moment is making sure our technical groupings are grouped together, so one answer may not unpick another answer because it's quite a complex set of queries that they've asked us. So it is quite a dynamic process as we go through that, but yes, they may well come back and ask additional subsequent questions.
Great, thank you. And just around the land acquisition side of things, I guess what steps are we doing to identify potential community interest in the ideal scenario of willing buyer, willing seller?
At the moment, as the paper says, we're still refining where the best opportunities for the land discharge are, and that's been done with the technical team. Willing seller, willing buyer was an option that we were looking at. If land came up that was desirable, what we need to be very careful of is that land, any of those land parcels that we were looking at, are actually suitable for the discharge, because not all land can take a discharge of this nature. So the technical team have been continuing to work through that, and we're still trying to refine where those areas might be.
So in terms of identifying, in your words, the best parcel, is that going to take into account anything around willingness of the seller, or is it simply down to, biophysical properties of the soils and those kind of things?
Well, in an ideal world, yes, it would be. If they were a willing seller, willing buyer, that would be the best outcome.
Indeed, I guess I'm asking a question in the real world. Will we be considering anything around community preference around provision of land, or is it simply going to come down to the science of
No, so
what that land can do?
Yeah, so the MCA criteria at the moment that we are looking at has various factors, which is not a community desire at the moment. So that includes, and we talk about the multi-criteria analysis, and so that includes a lot of technical componentry, but there's also other aspects to that will be cultural, social, but that will not have a community input to it, I think is what you're asking.
I'm somewhat, what I'm trying to ask is whether we'll be looking at if there are willing sellers within broadly the zone that we could land in, and use that as a factor in that decision-making criteria around the willingness of the seller as well as the properties of the actual soil.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that we could include. We haven't got to that point of the process yet, so that is certainly something that we could consider.
And what would that look like if it was taken on board?
Yeah, I mean, it could be a weighted attribute. So the criteria at the moment haven't been finalised, so that's something that we're currently working through. So that is something that would need to look at with the technical team in terms of how we would assess that and what that criteria would look like.
So would that include some sort of expression of interest type process where we actually understood if there was even any willingness within the zone?
I mean, you could contact them directly. It's not something that I've seen done in the multi-criteria assessment before. It's not something that I've witnessed in other projects.
Okay. Great, I'll consider those responses. Thank you. There don't appear to be any further questions, so thank you both for the report, and invite you to resume a seat. We have a recommendation in front of us that the committee receive the report titled Wastewater Treatment Plant Nature Calls Quarterly Update, presented to the Sustainability Committee 13th of March 2024, which I'll look to move, seconded by Councillor Bowen, and open up for any comments. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify from my questioning and to be really clear, I am in no way interested in us looking to fast track this process. I'm very nervous of a process which reduces the opportunity of our community to engage in what I think is one of our most, if not the most significant project this city will ever undergo in infrastructure terms. So my question was to ensure that any decision to shift process would come through this chamber. It seems to me, and thank you to the Chief Executive for confirming that that is a governance decision, and should we be required to think about that, then I would be advocating strongly for the maximum amount of community involvement in this decision. And actually, even with my questions about the time it takes to respond to questions in the current process, I actually think this process is better as we step it out more slowly. I think it gives us opportunities to look for the kind of innovative and adaptive responses that Councillor Naylor was driving at in her questions, and to look for better overarching outcomes for our community. So thank you to the officers for the report. I think we're on track, and that's good news. Thank you.
Thank you. By way of brief comment as well, do appreciate the officers and consultants' work in this space. It's undoubtedly already known to you that it's a big project with big expectations, but we appreciate that you're taking that very seriously in your work. And certainly keen that we do our best to ensure that the quality of inputs that we're putting to the consenting authority are such that we don't end up in a very, very slow game of ping pong where we put 200 answers and then we get another shorter list of questions, then, you know, potentially a quite protracted process. I do concur as well with Councillor Bowen's comments. I think there's been quite enough things done to communities around New Zealand from Wellington in the water space, and would be quite happy if we had the opportunity to continue to navigate this particular consent process through the channels that we've already engaged in. I think that would be a very healthy approach. Would also just like to thank the officers. I know there's a lot of good work going on behind the scenes in terms of the engagement with the steering group and the wider stakeholder community as we're on a fairly long journey here. So greatly appreciate your efforts there and look forward to the report coming through to us next quarter with a number of updates then, no doubt. So thank you both. And we will look for a vote. Thank you. Thank you. That's passed. 9 votes for, none against. We will look to press on to the next agenda item and see how we can get hopefully through it before our morning tea break. So I'd ask Peter Ridge, Senior Policy Analyst, and Natasha Hickmott to present the draft waste management and minimization plan in terms of approval for consultation.
Kia ora koutou. So we're presenting the Draft Waste Management and Minimisation, the WIMP, today for your approval for public consultation. So this document is closely aligned to the Draft Resource Recovery Plan, and the action plan at the heart of that WIMP mirrors the actions in the Resource Recovery Plan. So the Resource Recovery Plan has a focus on the first 3 years of the LTP. The WIMP, however, has a 6-year horizon. So some of the actions in the document have been expanded on. For instance, the development of the food scraps collection service, which goes beyond those first 3 years. We've had to include a couple of additional actions to account for implementation that's planned for 2028. One point we'd like to highlight is the reference to targets on page 22 of attachment 1. So these targets are taken from the performance standards which the Ministry for the Environment established last year as part of their work on Te Rautaki Para, the National Waste Strategy. So it's worth noting that we will be held to those performance standards regardless of whether they're in our WIMP. So we've included them to recognise the goals which we're being asked by MFE to meet. There have been questions asked before whether the actions in the Resource Recovery Plan will be sufficient to meet those performance standards, and the truthful answer is we're not certain. It's because the method for calculating the target hasn't been made available by MFE, so we don't actually know how we will be assessed on that. We don't know what year will be used as a baseline, and there have been delays from MFE in releasing information, so there's a possibility that they may review those performance standards, including the years that have been set out. So we've included those performance standards as targets in the WIMP, but we've included a caveat that they may be amended if the performance standards are subsequently amended or delayed, so that we have the ability to maintain alignment with Te Rautaki Para. Our Our consultation approach for the draft WIMP is integrated with the draft LTP, but it remains a separate consultation exercise. What this means is that the dates for the consultation will be matched to the LTP, will be available at the key public sessions to discuss and answer questions, and our consultation material will acknowledge the draft LTP and the resource recovery plan that has been consulted on at the same time. And we'll be encouraging people to read those documents as well and make a submission. So there's a clear linkage between both sets of consultation. And we'll have corresponding references in the draft LTP to direct people to consider the draft WIMP. So we're trying to make as many connections between those as we can as we go through the process. Natasha, did you want to add anything?
I just have a little thing to add, and that is we have worked hard to strike a balance between our aspirations and deliverability. We have focused on actions on areas which will make the biggest impact on waste minimisation within our sphere of influence.
Thank you both, and we'll open up for questions. Looks like I might start those questions off. Others may be collecting their thoughts. A couple of questions. Accepting your point, Peter, that there's caveats around the performance standards coming through from MFE, are you confident that the actions outlined here leave us in a strong position to continue to achieve the waste levy revenue that's potentially contingent on meeting those targets?
Yeah, when we presented to the council meeting with the waste assessment, we did talk about this a little bit. I think you used the words there, Mr. Chairman, about the whether we're in a confident position, and I think we can say we're actually going to make significant progress towards those targets. Whether we hit them or not is going to be dependent on how they're calculated, so that's why we've had to express that uncertainty there. Part of it is to do with the timing of when certain actions come into effect. So, for instance, the food scraps collection service we've planned to bring online in 2028. The target that we've included there anticipates food scraps being included, but if that date for the target were to change, then it would change the outcome. So that's why it's a bit of a, to avoid using the phrase moving target here, because those dates could change and our dates are somewhat set by our ability to bring those things online. It's quite uncertain, to be sure.
I was just going to add, also those performance targets aren't actually regulations yet, and therefore they're not currently tied to continuing to receive the money, to continue to receive the waste levy money. It has been indicated that that will be the case, but that has not been formally regulated through an act of Parliament.
Thank you. Then in terms of the consultation that'll happen with community, will there be some clear language in there that indicates there's potentially non-rates revenue on the line in terms of what we bring into the WIMP?
So could you elaborate on that a bit? I'm not quite sure what you're suggesting there.
I guess, will it be clear to the community looking at the draft plan that achieving that plan is potentially linked to whether or not we get $1.5 million worth of non-rates revenue?
It is our opinion that if the regulations do come into force as they currently stand, and there is potential for council to lose some or all of the levy money, that we would then be required to, and to be fair, MFE have indicated this to us, that we may be required to go into another review of the WIMP to indicate that, and so we would need to then do another review through the community consultation process.
Thank you. I guess what I'm trying to get to is whether we'll be transparent in the current consultation with community around the linkage between the waste levy revenue and the actions in our achievement of goals within this plan.
So within the draft WIMP, we set out the funding sources for the various actions. So to that extent, it is clear that waste levy funding is a component of how we pay for many of these actions. If there's some specific wording that you had in mind that we could include, then that's something we can certainly take into account if you feel that we haven't communicated that clearly enough.
Great, thank you. Just wanted to move on to green waste. My understanding from the waste assessment that was done is that we lose about 5,000 tons a year of green waste to landfill, even after all the green waste gets hauled in people's trailers down to Maxwell's line. Is that right? It's about 5,000 tons a year that we still lose to landfill?
There is certainly still a portion of green waste that ends up going to Matthews Ave transfer station and not being diverted, or ends up in the larger bins that people use for their domestic household rubbish. So there is a portion of that, and so as I think I indicated during the waste assessment presentation, that part of the food scraps trial, we will be looking, food scraps investigation, we'll be looking at options for green waste as well. I think that has come clear through feedback recently.
Thank you. So if we were to make that more explicit in the way the actions are stated, would officers be comfortable with that?
Yeah, so there's I believe it's action 3.6 describes the development of the food scraps collection service, which is, as I said, is planned for implementation in 2028. That initial action provides an opportunity to explore whether it's a solely food scraps collection service or if it's a food scraps and green waste collection service. So both options are possible, and if you were of a mind to amend the action accordingly, if the committee wanted to do that, then we can certainly include that in the...
Great, thank you. We'll move online to Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora kōrua. Just grabbing that out. I was just looking at your pie graph on page 65 and looking at 54% of that curbside waste collection being compostable. And is green waste included in your definition of compostable?
Yes, that is all organic material, so food scraps, potentially untreated wood waste. So yeah, anything that would be considered organic.
That awesome, thank you. And then over the page, I think 67 and 68, you've got some very helpful breakdowns of the food waste versus green waste components. And just was curious about the data for that, because it seems that the bigger the bin, the more green waste is going into it, and that's including council and private collections. So has that data come from the waste assessment, or where have we got that information from?
So council doesn't offer a 240 litre wheelie bin for waste, so that's just the private providers, because this was looking into the waste bins. So this data came from what we call the SWAP, which is the Solid Waste Analysis Protocol, which actually is a piece of data that feeds into the waste assessment. So part of doing the waste assessment, we actually do, and I'll try to explain this as briefly as I can, we actually pull, or our consultant pulls a portion of council bags and the private waste bins off the curb when they're out for collection, and actually does a full measure and weigh of them, so we can actually know exactly what is going into each of those bins. We also do an analysis over a week at the transfer station at Matthews Ave, where our consultants do the same thing. They visualise all the loads coming in, and they use that information to inform the annual estimation of types of materials that are coming into the transfer station and going through the curbside rubber services, for us to indicate where we could have some actions to improve waste diversion. Hoping that answers your question.
Yeah, so it's like a waste audit almost.
Yes, it is, and it's called a SWAT, which is a Solid Waste Analysis Protocol, which is part of determining a waste assessment, which is done through the MFE guidelines.
So thank you. I just had one more. I'm curious in your view as to why perhaps we might see people with the 240 litre bins choosing to use those bins for green waste if we have a drop-off point available. What do you think drives that sort of behaviour?
I'll be clear, it is my view, and it may not be the view of everyone. So I wanted to make that really clear. I would suggest 2 reasons. One, convenience, that they've, actually I think there'd be 3. One, convenience. 2, a slightly perverse logic that they've paid for the wheelie bin so they want to fill it. I can guarantee I've seen that one, but also accessibility. I mean, people may not have trailers to take waste to Awapuni. I will use my own home example. We have a trailer, but I can't use it. I can't drive the trailer. So I actually put my green waste into the compost bags or the bags that I buy my potting mix in, and that way they're light enough for me to carry as a female, and I put them in the back of my boot and take them to Awapuni. So I've looked at other ways that I can make sure I divert the waste, but I would say those are all of the reasons why that people perhaps use the larger bins. I would welcome if there are more thoughts on why that might be.
Thank you. That's very helpful. That's all from me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just looking at the action plan on page 24 of the plan, under 4.4, when it says investigate models for curbside waste collection service delivery, and that's done as a new item. How is that different to what we're doing at the moment?
So that action stemmed from a decision of the committee a year or so ago. There was a request for further investigating the most efficient and effective way to provide waste collection services and making use of regulatory tools. So we provided somewhat of a desktop assessment of that position and noted that the next step would be to do a more detailed effectively similar to a Section 17A review of the waste activity, but focusing specifically on the curbside collection. So that's a sort of one-off action to feed into possible recommendations around whether we want to continue our current service delivery of curbside waste collection or if there are alternatives that we should be exploring.
Okay, given that that wasn't very clear to me, I wonder if there's any, if you could give some considerations to making that a little bit clearer in the action plan, because otherwise I think people reading it might not understand what was proposed there.
We can certainly try and make that clearer.
Yeah.
There was some mention in the start of the WIMP about the key actions, and that was one of the ones there, but we can certainly take a look and try and make that clearer.
Okay, thank you. And then under 3.8, where we've got investigate the need for a new site for green waste and recycling drop-off facility to support city growth. In your comments earlier about investigating citywide green waste collection, you suggested that would better go in under 3.6.
That's correct. And the reason why is the requirement to introduce a food scraps collection, curbside collection by 2030 has been framed by MFE as either a food organics collection or a food and green waste collection. So it makes sense to consider those two in tandem. The new site for green waste and recycling drop-off facility to support city growth, that action doesn't necessarily go away because the action could be complementary as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So under 3.6 then, but we wouldn't be wanting to say that we were going to develop a green waste collection service, because at this stage we just want to investigate one. So
yeah. So the wording I would suggest would be to develop a citywide curbside food scraps collection service and investigate the inclusion of a green waste service alongside that.
Okay. And in terms of additional costs to do that investigation, what would you have any estimate on that?
Bryce and I have discussed this at length this morning, and we feel that we can include it within the current budget set for the 2 programs proposed next year for the investigations. But I want to be clear, I guess, at this juncture, that if the investigation and when we brought the report back to council, and council wanted us to include green waste collection,
Yeah, that's
curbside collection, there is no capital budget for that
Yeah,
currently proposed.
No, I'm very well aware. And that will be expensive as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. A follow-up question around Action 4.4 with the review of service delivery models. Will there be a terms of reference or something set up to guide that review?
Council officers, so myself and Bryce and the team at Awapuni will be doing what we call a request for a proposal for scope before we go out. If elected members would wish to see this before it goes out, I don't see why we could not send that through to you for your review and consideration.
And would the timing of that be prudent that we wait until after we've consulted and have a final waste management minimization plan?
Yeah, so the action there is from the 24-25 year, so that's from 1 July, and the intention is that this WIMP goes through consultation and is adopted by the end of June. So that would be when those actions would start to come online.
So at the point of adoption, we could, if the chamber chose to indicate that we wanted to see the terms of reference or the other documentation that goes into setting the scope of that review?
I don't see any reason why there wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah. Right, thank you. Yeah, I think that's it for questions, so thank you both. Would just indicate to the room that there is a second recommendation as well, which picks up on some of the questioning around green waste, and would indicate that it's a little bit from the wording that was indicated last night, but I think is consistent with the intent of simply ensuring that there is a green waste investigation. So we'll look to move both of these together with Councillor Johnson's concurrence and open up with some comments. I can't see the top of the screen to start reading the first recommendation. It is that the committee approve the statement of proposal draft waste management minimization plan 2024 attachment 1 for public consultation concurrent with and linked to the draft 2024-34 long-term plan consultation. And secondly, that action 3.6 in the draft waste management minimization plan be amended to read, develop a citywide food scraps collection service and investigate inclusion of a curbside green waste collection service, and that the corresponding action in the draft resource recovery plan be amended accordingly prior to consultation on the draft long-term plan. I'll just speak briefly to introduce them and firstly to acknowledge, as always, there's a tremendous amount of work that goes on in the resource recovery space. Unfortunately, despite that tremendous amount of work, some of our numbers are still moving in the wrong direction. So total waste to landfill, per capita waste to landfill is very much moving in the wrong direction, over a 10% increase in per capita waste to landfill, up over 600 kilograms per person per year ends up in a hole in the ground. So we do need a strong plan that very much speaks to that and that addresses that and gets things moving in the right direction. Would certainly concur that the range of actions there around food scrap interception in particular are going to be beneficial. And the argument that I'd put to the room today and will likely continue to put to the room is that the 5,000 tons of green waste that's currently put into a hole in the ground every year could much better be used as a green resource rather than a green waste, creating soil and things that we can bring back into our community. So very keen to see that elevated and explicit within this consultation, but very much appreciate the work that officers have done to bring things forward to this stage, and we'll be looking for strong community input on it. No doubt there will be a great deal of interest in this, and not only for the fact that Ministry for the Environment has now put some quite ambitious targets in front of us, and that we as a community will need to be prepared to respond to those. And there's also significant non-rates revenue coming in, over $1.5 million a year, which is very meaningful in terms of service delivery. The other thing say by way of introduction is around the action 4.4. I do think that we'd be prudent as a council to consider looking at that terms of reference before that review is fully commissioned to make sure that we're comfortable with scope and process there. And I think, as we've heard from officers, the appropriate time to pick that up would be at the point of adoption of the final waste management minimization plan. But the way that could proceed is quite significant in terms of council operations, quite significant potentially in terms of how the community receives services. And I think we'd be wise as elected members to keep that on our radar. So those are the introductory comments, and open to the floor for others. Firstly, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I was just going to comment on the additional recommendation around green waste investigation. I think there seems to be a synergy here with the food scraps, and I think it will be sensible while we're doing the food scrap work to include the green waste investigation. We may well be in the position of needing to divert a greater percentage of waste from landfill, and we could well find that it's useful to have the information about what would be involved and what would be the issues around establishing green waste curbside collection, ahead of that obligation perhaps being put upon us. So it seems to me that it would just be sensible here, whilst the work's being done and the officers have indicated that they can combine the two, just to have that investigation done, and then it doesn't commit us to providing a green waste curbside service, but it will give us the information that we need to make any decisions about that. And if by then, one would hope, we have more information from the ministry about what the requirements will be for diversion, then we'll have the information at hand that we can use. So I'd encourage you to support that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll move online to Councillor Isabella.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I also wanted to express my support for the second recommendation. So I think that green waste is clearly demonstrated as a key area where we could make a reasonable difference in diverting waste to landfill. And it is worth exploring, as Councillor Johnson says, there's some synergy there, just to see what that could look like, and taking on board the view of the officer. While just a view, I think, does raise some key points about accessibility and convenience, which might be deterring some from utilising the green waste drop-off point that we have. So I'm very happy to support that. And regarding the chair's points around the terms of reference, I think that's an excellent idea. I would be very keen for that to come to us at that point. It's something that I hear a lot about, so I am very much looking forward to hearing the public feedback on this very big piece of work, and very keen for us to get cracking with some action on it, really. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Those are the comments. I need a right to reply. I'll just check that the rooms and participants online are comfortable if we take both of these together. Not seeing any dissent, we'll call for a vote on both. And that has passed 8 votes for and none against. We'll break now for morning tea and come back at past. Welcome back, colleagues, and we will recommence the Sustainability Committee meeting. We'll note that we are sitting right on quorum, so if anybody does need to leave the room, feel free to do so, but we'll adjourn the meeting if you are a member of the committee until quorum is regained. We just have two substantive items left on the agenda, so hopefully smooth sailing. The first of those two items is the update on the Low Carbon Fund 23-24, and look forward to David Watson, the Senior Climate Change Advisor, to present that to us. Thank you, David.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, councillors. I'd like to acknowledge Adam Jarvis, who's joining us online from Taiwan. Good morning. And Sabrina Hinchy, who's the latest member of the climate change team in our strategy and planning. This report is a update, so we are in Q3 of the financial year that this low carbon fund is being run over. So we would expect to come back to you again at the end of the financial year to let you know what's happened with the rest of it. So hopefully everything in the report is clear and I can take it as read, and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, David. We'll open up for questions from members, starting Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I know you did say this in the report, but I'm just emphasising that by asking a question. Are we confident that we'll be able to realise the whole of this budget in this financial year?
So there is currently 2 projects provided on page 88 that we have not yet finalised. So I can't say with absolute certainty that we will spend 100% of the budget on those projects. I could also say that we do have several other projects in the pipeline that particularly should the solar project Rapuni not progress as we would hope, there's other things that could come in to take up the slack in that space. There's also things that we could potentially bring forward from next year's plans to match up with the renewals programme within the asset management and buildings property team. So should the solar panel work at Arapuni not go ahead, it might be that we miss our deadline a bit. But I wouldn't tell you exactly how much we can recover with other projects until that comes to pass.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, David. Probably just carrying on a similar vein to Councillor Johnson there, just in terms of, just wondering if you've got any further comment around the potential for solar energy at the Arena Library and the Lido, just in terms of, I guess, what's involved with kind of the assessment of that and how that perhaps can be sort of compressed into future years.
Certainly. So for the Lido and for the Arena, we've already done assessments. Yep. So we've looked at the energy usage, we've looked at the potential savings and scope for solar systems on those buildings. The reason why we aren't pushing ahead is that there are planned works on the building coming years, and it was thought that it's best to try and tie those things together as much as possible so we can get synergies around. If roofing works are being done, it makes sense to do the solar panel work after you've made repairs to the roof, for example, and particularly in the library, there are some issues with the roof of that building, and it makes sense to wait until those repairs have been made before you then go and put a load of solar panels on the top that might make that repair work more difficult. So we have those projects essentially sitting in abeyance until something else comes along that we can tie them in with and do all of the projects at once in a future year. If it was to come to pass that those projects were deferred for a long enough period, or even brought forward, then we'd adjust the low carbon fund's plans, and so that we can basically deliver those solar projects as and when they're best, sort of most economically delivered.
Okay, so just with those 3 buildings, just in terms of those works, can you remind me when are we going to do the works on those buildings? Do we have some understanding of when that comes in the LTP?
I was hoping Bryce would still be in the room for that question.
I'm not sure we have, through you, Mr. Chair, we don't have that detail on hand, but we can certainly get that to you.
Yeah, thank you. It'd be just good to understand how we might be able to align that going in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. A couple questions for me, David. One's just around, now that this is kind of a fund that's ongoing across multiple years, when you're looking to the year-end report, would it be possible to get a kind of overall tally of what the fund's achieved over its lifetime in terms of the scale of investment and what kind of outcomes we've achieved?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. We have records of all the money that's been transferred so far and what it's been used for, and what we predicted the financial and carbon savings would be from those investments. We've also been doing some monitoring of actual energy use reductions over the periods that it's been in operation, so we can provide you with what we spent, what we thought that would achieve, and then what we've been able to monitor as actual achievements in the real world.
Sounds like a great report, thank you. My second question was just around, I guess, how we recognize and acknowledge the community voice coming into this chamber and then kind of linking with actions that council takes. And as the example that came to mind here was around the petition that came to us in 2022 from 350 to Papaioa that was calling for solar on council buildings. And now we have a report that tells us, hey, we're going to put some solar on council buildings, but it's kind of silent on the petition. And I just wanted to understand kind of how we're linking and communicating back to community what's happening when they bring a petition or a request into us.
Absolutely. It's my understanding that the strategic direction of council, as provided by councillors, is informed by presentations to this chamber, to individual elected members, community engagement work. So there's a lot of information gathering to create strategy and policy within council. And this particular fund is a sort of delivery vehicle for that. So if someone would ask, how has the 350 to Papaioa information been translated, I would say look at the action plans within the LTP, where there's mention of installing solar on council buildings where appropriate. And then this would be the mechanism by which we deliver that strategic direction, rather than a direct result of the consultation.
Thank you for that. Might ask the Chief Planning Officer as well around perspective here.
Yeah, just to add to that, I obviously support the comments that David has made. I think one of the things we need to be conscious of when petitions such as the 350 Papaioa have been made, that we are, I guess in terms of encouraging active citizenship, recognising and demonstrating to those that make those petitions that they've been heard. I think to David's point, though, we do need to be careful and mindful that we receive community voice, for want of a better term, through a whole variety of forums. And in some cases, that community voice can actually be, inconsistent with council direction, or be putting forward a view that is different to what officers are recommending. So ultimately, officers take direction from our strategy and plans, and the community voice adds to that during the 3-yearly cycle. But certainly in this case, I think there certainly wouldn't have been any harm in the report acknowledging that petition in terms of reinforcing the role of active citizenship. But I think we just need to be careful and mindful that we're not sort of, for want of a better term, sort of cherry picking community voice to support the actions or recommendations of officers. I'm not saying that's the case in this situation, but it may well be, or could be a risk in other situations.
Thank you, David. I understand that Adam Jarvis online also has some perspective around this.
Morning, thank you, Mr. Chair. The sun's just poked up over the horizon here in Taipei. Just one minor point for clarification. I think it's just important to note that the low carbon fund here is ambivalent as to which particular low carbon option is should be delivered. And in these cases, we found that solar on these particular buildings at this time is cost effective in terms of reducing carbon, but it may well not have been the case either. So I think, just to reinforce what David Watson's said, in the sense of, there's been some various voices that we've heard that's informed strategic direction. This particular program, the Low Carbon Fund, happens to have been delivering solar in this particular occasion, but it may well not have. It may well, I would expect, as we continue to see the cost of solar decline, that we would continue to do so. But that's not necessarily the case. This program is not one to deliver. It's not a solar delivery program. It's a reduce carbon at the lowest possible cost program. Thanks.
Thank you for that reminder, Adam. There don't appear to be any further questions, so we'll thank you, David, for the report. And thanks to Adam for joining us early online, and welcome, Sabrina, to the Chamber and to Council, and I really appreciate knowing that there's a stronger team building in this space. So we have a recommendation in front of us that the committee receive the memorandum titled Update on the Low Carbon Fund 23-24 presented to the Sustainability Committee 13th March 2024, which I'll look to move, and seconded by Councillor Hancock. Thank you. Really appreciate this report coming to us, especially at this time. 12 months ago, I think we were all a bit surprised and concerned in terms of how that particular financial year was tracking in terms of the investment of this fund. And given that it is one of our principal strategic responses to emissions and climate change from an organizational point of view, it's one we do want to ensure that we're delivering strongly, and this report was good evidence that there's a significant amount of investment committed this year and forward investment and options in the pipeline, as was teased out in questions. I think the main insight for me and kind of pause for thought around this was around how we best connect and communicate the community's voice with actions that we take, and certainly accept officers' points that this fund is highly agnostic in terms of whether it's a solar fund or not, that it's an economically driven decision-making framework, and that there are some cases where petitions might not be quite as clear good news stories as the one that we've received. But I think there's, from a communications point of view, we should be willing to ensure that when the community comes and talks to us, we link those conversations back and close those loops where we can. And I think this very much sits in that good news story kind of category where demonstrate that as a council we are here listening and responsive to community. So want to acknowledge and thank the group at Awatapu College and Willa, who came in here about 15 months ago. They probably didn't redirect us towards solar, but I think they gave us further impetus, and I think that's very encouraging when we have delivery of projects that actually responds to those kind of impetus. So yeah, thanks again to officers for the report and commentary around it. And there being no further comments evident, we'll move to vote. Thank you. That's passed 7 votes for and none against, which moves us to the final item on, substantive item on the agenda, which is North City Council Carbon Neutral Feasibility Study update. And Adam Jarvis will be this online. So thank you, Adam, being out of bed in time to see the sun come up over the horizon, and look forward to your introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few quick comments by way of introduction, and then I'll pass over to David Watson to run through some quick highlights. I think just to provide some context for this report, we first presented a zero carbon feasibility study, essentially the results of a very large modelling exercise, which I think be fair to say from the conversations that I've had has been nationally leading in terms of the scale of this particular model. What we did then and what we've done now is take information from previously the previous LTP and now the draft LTP, run that through and to give you advice and some forecasting about what the implications of that information are. So you'll see that there is some commentary on the second page of the memorandum around council resolutions that were passed, and yeah, I just think it's important to clarify at this stage that until we had further information to run a model again, we weren't in a position to provide any additional advice over and above what we've done previously. So perhaps that could have been communicated earlier. Other than that, I think that this report does provide a good context in terms of the sorry, going back a moment. So in the first, so just to reiterate the timeline, 2022, we present the zero carbon feasibility study for the first time. We received from committee at that time the view that between scenarios 2 and 3 at that would be the preferred options in terms of going forward and designing and crafting programs for the LTP. As you may recall, scenario 2 was a sort of economically cost neutral forward investment, but that we would expect to pay for itself over time, such as kind of, let's say cost neutral solar project, for example, these sorts of things. And in scenario 3 was some mechanism yet to be determined that would effectively put a price on carbon and make marginal projects that maybe didn't quite pay for themselves but reduced carbon nonetheless viable within that framework. So we having been given that direction of somewhere between 2 and 3, we went and prepared a whole range of programs which were submitted into the LTP process. Obviously that process is highly constrained in a whole range of ways, capital spend and so on. And so after that, those sort of various deliberations were made, and we were able to have a sort of a concrete list of projects, programs rather, to base a further runoff. We've gone and done that, and that's what's being presented to you here. So I think, yeah, just to provide that bit of context, I'll pass over to my colleague, who just might be able to run through some of the outputs of that model.
Hello again, councillors. I think the graphs on page 107 and 108, it's worth noting that these are essentially in two halves. The first half being information that we've gathered from the draft LTP, and therefore we've got some fairly sort of detailed idea of what budgets might be allocated to particular things, for example, solar panels, tree planting, renewals. And then beyond 2034, is more speculative. And a lot of the things within this, particularly within scenario 3, rely on central government direction in things like carbon from electricity production. So whereas we've come up with some numbers from sort of 2037 onwards, I would say that those numbers have significant error bars on them going out to 2050. One way to think about this might be sort of 30 years ago was 1990. And if you can imagine what the technological and kind of societal state was in 1990, and then project that forward another 30 years to try and work out what 2050 might look like, and it's a very difficult process. That said, we've tried to be as sort of quantitative as possible, so starting with the existing emissions inventories and kind of extrapolating them out through the LTP decisions. I think we'll probably leave it there. Answer anything else through questions.
Great, thank you, Adam, and thank you, David, as well. Calling for questions, opening with Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll confess I'm a little bit challenged to understand some of this report, so bear with me if the questions are a bit basic. So where you've talked about us not being aligned with government terminology, is that the difference between carbon neutral and zero carbon? Are those the two phrases that are not in alignment?
Yes, so carbon neutral, net zero, zero carbon are used interchangeably.
But they're all different things.
But everyone defines their terms slightly differently.
Okay.
So you might find that zero carbon is not actually zero, it's 5% of a baseline. Or it might be a particular reduction amount. And the higher level you go, all the way up to the international agreements, the kind of slightly fuzzier those definitions become.
So are you recommending that we align our terminology with the government terminology, or are you just noting that it's different?
Well, initially we're noting that it's different, and I think it's up to council whether or not you want to pick a methodology to align to, or perhaps come up with your own.
Okay, but there was a comment in the report about updating the goal, given that it was an old goal.
Councillor Johnson, we might just come to David Murphy for a response.
Yeah, if I could assist there. I think one of the things we were conscious of in terms of preparing this report was the October 2011 target is a relatively old, or goal is a relatively old goal. I think since 2018 we've had a goal around our citywide emissions, and it's sort of in some cases been used to drive our work on the organisation as well, and it's sort of sat in the background. I think what we're saying is the LTP is an opportune time for us to reflect on this material, reflect on submissions, reflect on where the LTP lands relative to these scenarios, and adopt a new corporate target or goal as part of that process. This report points out and recommends that that happens, and we can provide advice, but at the moment there is an old goal. It hasn't been updated. It's got slightly different language to what has been used by the government. It has the word strive rather than what does, strive is quite soft. So what we're saying is I think this information I think is useful in terms of the council adopting a new goal, and ultimately we anticipate there will be submissions around LTP and climate change through the LTP process. And while the citywide goal has been the headline outward focused sort of goal, there is a need or an opportune time for the council to adopt a new target. And we can provide more explicit advice on that when the LTP, prior to the LTP being adopted.
Okay, thank you for that. So this is more socialising that idea. Okay, good. Well, I got there. Now, David, you referred to some graphs on some pages, but I didn't have those pages in my, those page numbers on my electronic document. So can I just check what graphs you were referring to when you said you had I guess, forward planned how much emissions could drop as a result of the LTP. Is that figure 1 and figure 2, and 3?
It's most notable in figure 4.
Figure 4. Okay.
Because figures 1 and 2 include landfill emissions, which kind of buffer everything else up, so that the changes are less noticeable.
Yeah.
It's the same data, it's just presented slightly differently.
So in figure 4, where there's a kind of a bump around about 2034, that's from then on, that's what you're saying is hard to estimate. But it's reasonable, it's a more certain, if anything can be certain, estimate between 2024 and 2034. Is that the correct understanding from that graph?
Yes, we've been able to base that on the draft LTP, whereas beyond that, we don't have any kind of specific guidance on what council might be intending.
No. Okay. Right. Thank you for that. So, last question. Sorry about this. In terms of how we engage with the community on the LTP, my read of this paper is that the suggestion is that we would hear submissions and then set a target. But would we not be better off to have, I realise it's a bit late for this now, but to propose something, first of all, like if we were going to change the old goal, should we not have proposed that in the long-term plan for people to be able to submit on, rather than, my understanding, which may or may not be correct, that we're going to wait for submissions to come in to set this thing? So if I've got this wrong, please tell me.
Go to David Murphy for a response on that.
Yeah, look, I think the corporate target has sort of sat in the background for since 2011. So, rightly or wrongly, there's a sort of an assumption. There's an assumption that has continued through this LTP process. So, for instance, the corporate target hasn't been a headline in any of the strategy and plans you've adopted to date. But that, as I said, that broader citywide reductions target has. Obviously, any corporate target you adopt will be influenced by the final makeup of the LTP in terms of, and I appreciate you could say that with all parts of the LTP. Yeah. If you wanted to adopt a corporate target today, you could do that and we could incorporate that into the material, but I think our advice is the fact that it sort of sat in the background and the headline outward-facing target has been the citywide one, then we anticipate there will be submissions on a range of things that influence the programs that help with our corporate emissions through the LTP. And at the end of that, I think, as part of the deliberations, we could provide an updated report with an explicit recommendation alongside the report on the LTP submissions about what the corporate target, recommendation for the corporate target. But as I said, that said, if you wanted to adopt one before it went out for consultation, I'm sure we could weave that in to the CD or the climate change plan before it went out on the 8th of April.
I'm just trying to further my understanding of the paper and what it's telling us, what we're trying to do as a result of it today, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, the recommendations really are about socialising that I think the council needs to make a decision on the corporate target. This report contains information that's useful in reaching a decision, but I'm not sure the council has all the information today to adopt a corporate target. So hence the recommendation that we would provide advice alongside the deliberations of the LTP.
Okay. Thank you, David. That does clarify it.
Thank you, Councillor. David, if I've read the report correctly, there's some reference to starting to use planting for offsetting of some emissions. Is the land that would be necessary for that planting already in council ownership or management, or are we talking about potentially setting up a scenario where land acquisition is needed to meet these needs, or can we kind of go through a third party to do that? How does that work?
So there's a number of different options. There is already budgets within the long-term plan around tree planting. None of those budgets are specifically targeted at emissions reduction. We plant trees for a wide variety of reasons, all the way from street trees to biodiversity planting. There may well be some planting related to the update to the wastewater treatment works. There may well be plantings based around plan changes. So if there's a new development, it may well be that some portion of the land within that development is made available for parks or tree planting for biodiversity or stream planting. So there are a variety of opportunities as to where we could plant these trees. And from a carbon perspective, it doesn't really matter where you plant them, as long as they grow sufficiently to absorb the carbon out of the atmosphere. There are some large tracts of land, pieces like Browns Flat, where we have several hectares of land that's not currently forested or necessarily being used actively. So I'm not anticipating that we need to buy lots of land to plant trees on, but the number of trees that need to be planted is large. So wherever there is an opportunity to include planting in something else that we're doing, or realizing lots of different co-benefits from a planting project, I think this would be one element of that.
Thank you for that. I think Adam Jarvis may have a contribution here as well.
Just a couple of points of clarification. Browns Flat is about 200 hectares, not like several. So there's quite a bit of land there. And then between that, a Kotiri plan change, Kakatangata, and various areas that are already being signalled for replanting, for available for planting. And we're talking here about sequestration should be considered as essentially new planting. If you're just planting a tree that has fallen, replanting a tree that's fallen over and is rotting, it's not really sequestering any additional carbon. So we're talking in general about new plantings here, but that given what we're modelling in scenarios 2 and 3, that the majority of that offset could be done within existing or planned land at council lines.
Great, thank you. And further to Councillor Johnson's query, so figure 4 in the papers on page 108, is that likely to appear in the supporting material in the long-term plan so that people can understand what the investment's likely to deliver in terms of emissions trajectories?
We can certainly look at how it can be included in the supporting material. Yes. Yeah.
I guess, is there anything already in the supporting material that shows this trajectory, or would this genuinely be a contribution to communities' awareness of what our plans are in the climate space?
As far as I'm aware, there's nothing in the supporting material to date, but we can we can certainly look at how we can the most appropriate place to include that.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, David and Adam. Look, I'm sorry, just to go back to where the Chair was talking about in terms of plantings. My calculations is that we're probably looking at somewhere between 500 and 550 hectares between now and 2050 of new plantings. So can I just be assured that we've actually got sufficient options around actually achieving that?
So the numbers that we came out with was sort of 434 hectares for scenario 3 and about 450 for scenario 2. We haven't done any detailed work as to exactly where that might be, but we could go away and do some more work and come back to you with some options or sort of proposals, not necessarily proposals, thoughts about what future developments might include.
Yeah, thank you. So would that require a recommendation here today, or would that be just taken into part of the future work of the group?
I might just pause here to see if Adam Jarvis wants to contribute at this point, before coming to your question around whether direction's needed.
So I think just to my point earlier, and I think this might answer your both questions here. The key in terms of the land that's currently available, or that is becoming available through plan changes, we've got the majority of the land that would be required already, and I would suggest that any decision around acquiring of the remainder is probably a question for a decade or time. What we're going to, as we go on, we're going to have a clearer idea about what our emissions trajectory is, whether options around, let's say, carbon capture and storage become more feasible over time and can help contribute to the overall amount required to sequester in terms of getting to carbon neutrality. So I'd suggest, for the next decade and more, we've got plenty of capacity, and that we would be coming back as a clearer picture develops. We're starting to, let's imagine we're starting to use up a significant amount of that capacity. We've only got another 5 years worth of land left to plant. We could come back to it. I think that would probably be the more appropriate time to come back to with some options. But to my colleague's point, it's certainly something that could be done in theory now. It's just that it would be more hypothetical in nature rather than concrete.
Thank you, Adam. I understand David Murphy has a comment as well for you, Councillor.
Yeah, I'm not seen to be kicking this conversation to another process, but certainly there's an opportunity this afternoon via the vegetation framework, I think, to explore this in a bit more detail in terms of council's the role of council assets and vegetation and meeting our corporate targets. So we've had a vegetation framework since 2016. The focus has tended to be on the street trees and the reserves. But there's no reason why that vegetation framework, and it's in the material this afternoon, can't start to think about, well, how do we manage our assets and vegetation in terms of our broader goals around climate change. And so, yeah, as I said, I'm not wanting to close down the line of question or anything, but there's certainly an opportunity this afternoon to start to think about the role of vegetation in the city to address multiple outcomes, including climate change.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I suppose just to close that off, I guess, is that a deliberate approach might be more sufficient. Thanks.
Thank you. It sounded like you may be previewing a comment for us there, Councillor. Not seeing any further questions in the queue, I think we will thank you, David and Adam and David Murphy, for the responses, and move to the recommendations, noting that there's 2 recommendations. The first is a part of the process of finalizing the 2024-34 long-term plan. Council either affirm the existing corporate emissions reduction target or replace the existing emissions reduction target with a different one. And secondly, that Council note that further officer advice on the corporate emissions reduction target will be provided alongside deliberations in the 24-34 long-term plan, which I'm happy to move. Seconded by Councillor Johnson. And invite comment, Councillor Johnson.
Yes, well, at the risk of making myself look a bit stupid, I just have a plea for these reports on climate change to be a bit more accessible to those of us who are not experts in climate change. It's a whole area of scientific endeavour which is becoming more and more complex and specialised, given the fact that we have to have our own team of climate advisors now. And I will just say that I did sort of struggle to get to grips with this report, to be honest, as you could probably tell from my questions. And, of course, we can't be experts in everything. But I would just say that it's important that we deal with this issue and that we make sound decisions. And in order to do that, we need to be able to have an easy understanding of the reports that are presented to us. And I just did struggle a wee bit with this one, and I suspect I probably wasn't the only councillor that struggled with it either. So it's just, you know, that I understand it's a technical area, I understand it's tricky, and we have people who are very expert in it, but the rest of us are not expert in it. And I would just put a little plea in for things being a little bit simpler to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Quite concur. Councillor Hancock.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, really, the only comment I've got to make is really, I guess, the under those scenario 2 and scenario 3, where it talks about, I guess, plantings to offset our carbon. I just really think that probably going forward, we actually need to be very deliberate in terms of how we actually do that. And I guess I just caution against kind of sort of an approach where we kind of sort of actually look at it every sort of 5 or 10 years and then try and figure out what it is we actually want. Because, you know, land is a finite commodity. And of course, if we are going to use planting as a means to offset, then of course we need to be planting on suitable land, which is not land which is actually used for agricultural purposes. I guess we need to just be mindful that in future we need to be very deliberate in terms of how we actually go about that process, and that's obviously over the next 25 years. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just by way of perhaps final comment, seeing the queue empty, want to acknowledge the work that has gone on over a number of years, and while I accept and support Councillor Johnson's point that it could be made probably much more accessible than it sort of sits in these papers, I think as a position for council, we are in a much stronger position than we've ever been in terms of having an evidentiary base by which we can understand, forecast, set goals around our future emissions trajectory. And I think, you know, that's a wonderful position for us to be in as council, is to have a strong base of information to work from. And so would acknowledge the huge lift that's gone on over a number of years to get some models up and some ways to actually project out emissions across at least a 10-year span with some certainty. And I think we accept that there's some pluses and minuses and error bars around the rest of it. In terms of kind of where we're at in the long-term plan process and how we find ourselves only days away from notifying it for the consultative step without having a firm corporate emissions target, probably not a position I'd prefer to be in, to be honest. I don't really think it's great use of our voice as council to have targets be outputs. I think targets should be inputs, and it's unfortunate that we're in a position where, for a range of factors, we are now expecting that the target in terms of corporate emissions or organizational emissions will be an output of a process rather than a driver in that process. So I'm hopeful that in 3 years' time we're in a position where should the next council choose to revisit a target through the long-term plan, that it's done in a timing and in a way that actually allows it to be a driver. Comment a little bit about the conversation I think that has started helpfully through this report around planting and around offsets. I think it's a very important conversation for us on a couple dimensions. I think one is where it happens and how it happens, which is very much part of the story. And I think the other one is to what extent we as a community and as a council choose to rely on the offsets version of addressing emissions versus the upfront version of addressing emissions through investment that actually reduces emissions at source. And so I think it does open up some interesting conversations, and I hope the guidance that comes back to us around these two recommendations begins to address that point in terms of the land scope that might be needed, and also the risks and benefits of going into an offsetting future rather than going into a future that relies on more direct reductions. I do support both of these recommendations in terms of where they're going, in terms of resetting the organizational target. It's a fairly old target now. It speaks to 2050. It speaks only to striving. So it's really one that we should have a stronger focus on. And so I'm pleased that we do have recommendations in front of us that will at least allow us to land that within the next few months, so that we have some certainty citywide in terms of the headline target and some certainty at an organizational level as well. So do want to again acknowledge and thank officers for getting us to the point where we do have some robust numbers to work with and subsequently debate what kind of emissions profile and trajectory we want into the future. With that, we'll call for a vote. Thank you. That's passed unanimously, which moves us on to the committee work schedule. I'll check with the planning officer if there's any further comment. I'm getting the nonverbal signal that there is none for those online. I will look to move that, seconded by Councillor Hancock, that the Sustainability Committee receive its work schedule dated March 2024. Open up for any comments. Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. And that is passed unanimously, so that leaves us with closing karakia, which I'll offer now. Kia puta, ki te whao, ki te aumarama, whakamau kia tina, haumie, huie, tai kie. Kia ora and thanks everyone. Deputy Mayor, you might have some comments around the upcoming workshop.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just to remind everyone that at 3 o'clock in the Missoula room, we have a workshop on vegetation. Well, I'm all good for